Amy and Brad. So they will be talking about more of the Accenture related, consulting related, less related to the like just the format. It's more like component, like more of the specific things. All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tristan.
No problem.
I'm Pete Henry, and I'm a senior manager out of our Accenture's Cleveland office. And I think the points that you raised, Trista, it's going to certainly apply, whether it's consulting or any career for that matter. What we want to do is certainly kind of keep this pretty informal, but I'll let them introduce themselves as well, and we'll give our perspectives on what we look for in a resume from our company and kind of in general as well, that's applicable across. So, and then I think we're going to spend some time sitting with each of you, kind of going through some questions that you have, looking at your resumes and trying to help you with some coaching. Just so we get an understanding, what years are you guys as far as juniors, sophomores, seniors?
Mixed version, freshmen.
Graduating seniors.
Pretty good mix of all.
Graduating and freshmen?
So it's probably going to be a little bit better for the sophomores and juniors because you've got some time to think about what you want to have in the resume. For the seniors, hopefully you've got the stuff that you just need to show in your resume. So let me let Amy and Brad introduce themselves, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks, Trista. Thanks for having us. This is great that you guys are doing this, and it's great that you also have the resources that you do. So I definitely encourage you, if you have not used the Resume Center, to do so. I'm Amy Pinkerton. I'm with Accenture, as you know. I've been with Accenture for 11 years. I was with another consulting firm before that for 6, so I've had a lot of consulting experience. Seen a lot of resumes along the way, and we were joking that I was going to bring my resume, but I'd probably be a good example of what not to do with a resume at this point because it hasn't been updated in a while since I left my job. And like I said, I've been with the company for a while. So I don't know if we want to jump into tips right away or just have Brad.
Go ahead and
Sure. Brad Collins. Actually graduated from Case in 2009, so I'm not too far removed from you guys. I've been at Accenture for about 2.5 years, and I'm a consultant. And I think I'd probably be the same way with my resume. I haven't updated it since, but I've certainly learned a lot, and just being able to review resumes from people coming into Accenture, and even internally, the way we staff, we look at internal resumes too. So I think we're going to have some interesting points and certainly some do's and don'ts.
Good. Well, I think, maybe I'll start off with just, some of the key things that we look at, just kind of going through, the number of resumes that we get. There's actually a career fair next week. For those of you that are juniors, it's focused on internships, but we'll actually have a table there as well with, I don't know how many companies are going to be there, but a little plug for that.
It'll be 96.
Oh, that's right, you're going to say it too. I'll be with it too. So, but if you look at some of the key things, certainly just the presentation itself of it, but some of the key metrics that we look at just to draw the line. If you have, we kind of look at it in terms of technical degrees and non-technical degrees. That from a grade point average, we actually draw the line and say you need to have a 3.0 or above in a technical degree, and you got to have a 3.2 and above for a non-technical degree. Anything that's not that for our company, we pass it. So I think beyond that, some of the key characteristics are really, did you just go to school or is there work experience? And I think for us, seeing that you have work experience, whether it's flipping burgers or doing, some hardcore internship or co-op program, just the fact that you worked and you're doing that in conjunction with going to school is another key important thing for us. And then leadership characteristics. What did you do, whether it was, moving your way up to manager flipping the burgers or, started a consulting club or, those kinds of things are important, showing that, again, you're taking initiative, you're taking the lead. So I think for those juniors and sophomores and below that are in the room, focus in on those things so you can tell the story later on and know that you've got time to do that. And I think even for seniors that may be in the room, there's still some time to probably do that if you want to pull something together quite
Don't go
quickly.
start a
but-
club though, and just because you have it on your resume, like.
Right, right.
That could be kind of obvious too.
But, you know, so I would say those three things are the most fundamental, you know, making your grades, having the work experience, and showing leadership qualities.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what Pete said, and I was one of those non-technical degree people, so it is possible, if you don't have a technical degree, to get into consulting. I would just add that, you know, no one expects you coming right out of school to have a 2-page resume. In fact, or multiple-page resume. If you do, sometimes it just means that there's additional things on there that don't belong there. So there's nothing wrong with having just a 1-page, concise resume that tells a story, like Pete said. The fluff thing, you know, I know people get really caught up in feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough stuff on here, I need to add, so I need to go join, or start a club, or join a club, or, you know, they get that panicky syndrome, but, you know, again, everyone recognizes where you're coming from. I had somebody who put on their resume that they liked Pink Floyd. I'm like, that's great. I like Pink Floyd too, but I don't really care that, you know, that's not really relevant to your job search. So, you know, I would just, there's nothing wrong with featuring your education first. I mean, that's what you've been doing. That's been your job. But as Pete said, if you do have work experience, if you can show, you know, that you've been a leader of a team, or, you know, that you're the manager at the burger joint, or whatever it might be, that's always helpful. Once you do start getting more work experience, move that education piece down. So you get that work experience featured first. So just, and I think the kind of common overlaying theme is you want to tailor your resume to the job that you're going for. So if it's your first job out of college, then you're going to have that resume that features your education first and your grade point average and your experience, maybe your extracurriculars. Once you start going through and applying to multiple companies, you really want to, and maybe you don't really know exactly what you want to do, maybe it's consulting, maybe it's something else, but really make sure that you're looking at your resume every time that you're applying, read through that application, look at what they're looking for, and then really tailor your resume to meet that. So a lot of people put like this objective statement at the top. That's okay, that's fine, but again, don't have a subjective statement that says, I want a rich career in consulting, and then submit that to, you know, a manufacturing company. You just really need to pay attention. I know it's easy to kind of start looking at your resume and almost not seeing it anymore, but believe me, those things are going to stand out. And people ask a lot, well, what's the right format for a resume? There's not one right format for a resume. There's a zillion different formats, but to Trista's point, the content is certainly important, but the format can turn someone off immediately. So if it's not crisp and clean, people may just look at it and say, oh, I can't even like deal with this. I don't even want to read this. So the formatting is important, but obviously the content is super critical too.
So a couple don'ts I think I figured out from my experience. I was reading resumes and I got to the end and kind of along the Pink Floyd situation. Somebody put that they were really good at multitasking because they could play guitar and sing at the same time, which is a great skill, don't get me wrong, but it's probably not the kind of multitasking that we're doing at work. So what I took away from kind of my resume reviews and what I've seen is that use a bit of psychology to it. Primary recency. So the first thing on your resume and the last thing on your resume are probably going to sit with the person reading them more so than the middle content, right? Because they're going top to bottom. So if the most important thing to you is your GPA, I say put it at the top. If the most important thing to you is that you're the president of a club and that's what you're going to talk about in an interview and that's what you think is going to sell you to a company, you know, put that as high as you can because that's the piece that you want to talk about. And then there's that recency effect, the last thing that's on your resume. Sometimes, you know, they take 20 seconds at the top, but if they do make it all the way at the bottom, you want to have that catch. Maybe you play guitar, or maybe you play soccer, or maybe you're an avid, you know, foreign movie buff. Something that, you know, someone's going to say, possibly, oh, you know, I know a little bit about that. If I'm interviewing this person, I'm going to want to ask them about that.
The other thing, I help with Professor Johnson teaches a course that you may have been in, and we come in and talk about resumes. The other thing that I've heard that people have done, I've never actually seen this, is sometimes people think that to stand out, they need to put their resume on funky paper, or like scented paper, or color. Don't do that. Not that I think any of you are going to run out and buy scented paper, but you know, it's fine. You can stand out in other ways in terms of your formatting, unless you're applying for some like super creative job that's really out there that might appreciate some different format of resume. Typically, I think your traditional format is pretty safe.
I think another thing to add is when you look at, for us, in the interviewing process, you know, the first thing is just catching the eye to, you know, look at the resume and say, I want to talk to that person. So, you know, it's kind of the basics of what we've already gone through. But for us, in our first round of interviews, we basically ask you to make your resume come to life. So I think to Brad's point on, you know, how you lay that out, you want to be able to tell the story of what you've done and what you can highlight. So think of it in terms of that it's going to become your script for what you would use in the first conversation that you'd have with whatever company that you're interviewing with.
Any questions?
Are there any experience that you think is really important or relevant from case, like during your education, that can be input in, saying like, I don't know, I'm trying to format the whole question again. So are there any experience that you wish you have done at case earlier in order to help you to get better success in your career and stuff?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, participating in programs just such as these, you know, and you know, to me, it always goes back to the grades, the leadership, and the working, you know, and get yourself engaged. I mean, I think there's always an opportunity for everybody to be involved more than they are today, even if they're really actively involved. So it's only going to help you be able to tell a better story, have more experiences to share. So that's probably the biggest thing to me, is the content of what story you can tell. And then I think when you tell the story, you can tell it in a way that it looks a lot better than it even might be. And I don't want to say it that you're, you know, twisting the story around, but, you know, as an example, if you could have done some senior project, say, and, you know, with that you did it with a group or whatever, you know, you can bring across things like teaming with the people that you worked with, how leadership of, you know, how you guided that came to life, versus saying I did a senior project with 2 other people. And really turn that into more about how, you know, you could then represent that company, or what skills you can bring to the table. So think about, you know, what you did, but how you can communicate it more effectively. And I think the way you lay this out is actually great in terms of quantifying what it is, you know, and saying, I did this from this time to this time. I worked with, you know, X number of people. It had an impact on, you know, by this amount of, whether it's dollars or something else, or, you know, the growth that you had, the percentages. I mean, all of those, you know, for me, really stick out and say, well, they didn't just, you know, start a club. They started a club and grew it to, you know, 50 people, or, you know, those kinds of things. You're like, wow, that's pretty impressive, especially over whatever timeline that might be. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, and when I went to Case, I was for grad school, so I already actually had a job at that time, but I did switch after my program. But using the resources, again, I already mentioned this, but when I went to undergrad, I mean, I don't think I knew we had a career center when I went to college. I did not take advantage of it at all. So I think just while you're in this environment, definitely taking advantage of not just kind of the formalized resources, but your professors and, you know, even your friends and students around you that you can bounce ideas off of, have them take a look at what you've done. The other thing I would add is somebody asked a question in that class about putting down involvement with sports on your resume. And I don't know how you guys feel about this. To me, I feel like it shows great commitment when you're involved in something. I mean, if you've been on the football team for all 4 years of college, I mean, I think that can show real commitment. It's a lot of hard work, especially if you were in a leadership role on the team. You know that sometimes people feel like because of that commitment to a team sport, it sort of, you know, traded off on them not being able to do some other things. And so maybe their resume doesn't look as strong because they were really involved with those athletics. But I think that there's a place for them on the resume too. I don't know
going to take a little bit of opposite approach too. I've seen some resumes that you can clearly tell when people are resume building. You know, if you have 50 clubs, you probably weren't the president of all 50 clubs. There are some things that I did at Case that I put on my resume that probably could have left off. I probably could have found something else to put on there. So, you know, while you want to be well-rounded, you do want to show involvement in campus. You want to show that, you know, you're flipping burgers or you're doing something like that, and also your academics. You don't want to have too much. And that goes with the format even too. I mean, if you're using 8-point font, you probably have a little bit too much on your resume too.
Yeah, I mean, having one or two things that you're really passionate about versus, you know, 6 or 7 that you're just kind of dabbling in, I think is fine.
And I think there's also kind of back to the point of, you know, the guitar playing part. You know, I think some of it is at the bottom. If you say your hobbies, and you know, maybe it is, you know, you play jazz at some nightclub on the weekends or something. Sometimes that's a great icebreaker because, you know, for me, at reading that resume, and certainly if it passes all the characteristics of looking good and having the content, I'm going to lead in with the conversation probably around that, just to kind of break the ice and understand what type of person I'm talking to. So I think it's a creative way to figure out, you know, what you could put in there as either a hobby or an activity that you do that can be used for that purpose. So.
When considering a resume, I like looking at campus involvement. Does it make a big difference if they're heavily involved in just, you know, general activities, or if it's, you know, directly related to the position they're applying for?
I think for us, it's really just looking at how well-rounded the person is. So if you know, if you're interviewing for us, if you're not part of the consulting club or you're part of something else, you know, it's not like we're going to knock that. So you know, it's probably good if you have a passion around an area and it ties to whatever company you're interviewing with, you know, to have that kind of link. And it's to Amy's point around tailoring your resume. If you are, you know, maybe you'd want to lead with some kind of item up closer to the top if it ties directly in with the type of company that you're interviewing with, versus maybe you lead with a different one if it was another type of company or a different industry or, you know, something to that point. But it doesn't really, in our mind, it's more about what are you doing than, or how involved are you than exactly what you're doing.
And to that point, you could even, like, if you're looking at, you know, one entry, if you're part of the Chief Club.
Cheese?
There's a Chief Club. There was one. Is there still a Chief Club?
I don't know.
Jeez.
I've
Jeez.
heard of it. I've heard of that.
I should have been more involved.
It's the wine club.
But if, say you're on the Chief Club, you did 3 different things, right? And one of them was maybe you built a website for the Chief Club. That probably makes sense to put it at the top of the bullet points for your Chief Club entry because you're applying for a job at, you know,
Were you part of the cheese club?
I was not. I was envious of the Chief Club.
You make the cut.
Full roster.
After my time.
So we can, if we're going to answer more questions or we want to do it in the form of the tables, you know, we're open to even just diving right in. And
I have one extra
Sure.
question, actually. So don't hate me that I'm using all your time. I'm pretty sure they will have like quality, awesome story to tell. I'm just really curious, what's the most creative format or creative resume that you have ever seen that's really different, stand out, that catches your eye?
I'm kind of with Amy as far as, you know, if it's purple or something, and you know, I don't. To me, it's and maybe it's a reflection of our company. It's, you know, conservative, straightforward. You're clean and direct to the point, and it's more about the content. I mean, it's got to look nice and have bullet points versus trying to jam paragraphs in and have small font, and you know, it just kind of looks ugly. But if you have it structured right, it's really then more about the content, because you could have a real nice laid out resume that doesn't have any meat to it, and we're going to pass that over as well. So.
And a lot of challenges, I think that, well, I think more and more you've got online applications too, where a lot of times you have to paste your resumes in, and so thinking through how you do that, and then, you know, I know sometimes there's options to do a cover letter. I'd say always do the cover letter. It's another way for you to sort of, through prose, or, through just language, introduce yourself versus just the resume, so stating why you think you would be a good fit for that job. Now, resume, I don't have a great example standing out, but one time I interviewed someone who brought in this little, I'm not technical, so he brought in some little machine that he had fixed or was fixing, and I was just like, whoa, you totally lost me. I mean, he like wanted to show me this little thing that it was very sweet, but yeah, it was a little out there.
Yeah, the purple paper sends a big, avoid glitter, I think. Number one rule.
Betty,
Yeah.
Betty.
No loaded envelope or anything. Yeah, but I think to everybody's point, it's really about content.
Yeah, I came in late, so I don't want to ask a question that's already been covered. But have you talked about CVs versus resumes? Is that something we talked about?
No.
Okay, could you kind of go over, like, from an undergrad standpoint, I know that, like, sometimes they ask for resumes and sometimes they say that you could supply a CV if you'd like. What kind of things would you look for in the difference, and would you recommend from an undergrad standpoint, like, what do we put on a CV that's different from a resume?
I always thought of it as resume / CV.
Well, I think
okay.
CV, I've seen more CVs in like, sort of scholastic, I don't know what's the word, scholarly or educational.
More academic positions.
Thank you,
Okay.
that could speak. Those types of positions versus consulting, so I don't, that's why that term is not, I think, resonating as much with us, but.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think they're a little bit interchangeable in our world, but, and I don't know if there's like even a different format that you would use for one versus the other.
You're the guy right out of school, you should know
Yeah.
what that is, come on.
I've never had to write a CV.
So we had that
Right.
tool, right, then
I-
the CV recommender?
I have seen CVs, like from some of the people I've worked with who are from Europe. I think that's a little bit more common there than it is in the States, as far as a professional versus academia.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I
we
think
just-
CVs
we
I
don't
tend
need
to
worry
see
about
more
that.
like if people have a lot of publications or they've written books or
Yeah,
articles that
that's a
those.
good answer for me.
Just curious, what were some of your standout things like that you did in college?
I dug up my resume from 1994, and I think I had Fortran on there, Lotus 123. You guys are probably like, what the hell is that? But, I think with mine, it was the work. I was working like 20 hours a week while I was taking 18 hours, so I told the story around that. And I was a bit more involved. I actually did a binary program with Miami University and Case. So I was 3 years at Miami and 2 years at Case. So I was more actively involved in like the clubs and stuff like that at Miami. And then at Case, it was more of a job because I was working most of the time. So I tried to tell that balance of a story, and that's my key things that stuck out.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I was an English major undergrad, and so I wanted to go to grad school. I mean, that was really my plan. So getting the whole job thing was sort of a secondary pursuit, but I was part of a sorority, and so I highlighted that leadership role that I had in the sorority. I did work, like he did, I worked in the admissions office, so I highlighted that. Between college and getting a job, I was a VISTA volunteer, which is sort of like the Peace Corps, domestic Peace Corps. So I always put that because I feel like, and again, this is actually a point that just for job searching in general, I think, to me, if a company's interested in the fact that I was a VISTA volunteer, that's the kind of company I want to work for, because they obviously have the same types of values that I have. So whenever you're thinking about applying for a job or you're interviewing for a job, it's not just about them learning about you and being impressed with you, it's about the other way as well. You want to make sure that you're going to be a good fit. So I know I'm kind of skipping ahead to interviewing, but just in general, think about that. When you're putting things down in your resume, things that are really, again, that you're passionate about and were really interesting to you, if that, really gets someone's attention in a company, then that maybe means it's going to be a good fit. Cheese Club? No?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
not much to add there. Actually, jumping ahead to interviewing though, I left something on my resume. So I had a couple activities. I was on UPB and Engineers Without Borders, and I actually left a club on there, down at the bottom, that I didn't enjoy being in. That's kind of a talking point in my resume, like, this is, you know, kind of how I shaped my career at Case, because I kind of did the first thing I could think to do at Case, which was join every club I could, and then kind of whittled it down to, like, what's my personality, and what do I look like on a sheet of paper. So, I think UPB was probably number one then, yeah.
And I put that I could multitask playing the guitar and singing.
That's good. Like, that was mine.
That was right at the end there.
Like to see that.
We passed that one.
But I can't, so. Anybody else? So you want to, Tricia, you want to split up the tables?
Yeah,
and-
that would be great.